It all started on a quiet afternoon in a small English neighborhood where life usually moved at a calm and predictable pace. Sarah Bennett, a woman known for her independent spirit, had just parked her old but well-kept Jeep in her driveway. To her, it wasn't just a vehicle, it was her pride, a reminder of the freedom she had worked hard to build. But what she didn't know was that this Jeep carried a secret far bigger than she could have imagined, and soon her peaceful life was about to be shaken by a storm she never asked for. Across the street lived Karen Whitfield, a woman with a sharp tongue and an iron grip on the neighborhood's rules. Karen wasn't just a neighbor, she was the self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA, a figure everyone quietly tried to avoid. She watched Sarah's every move, picking apart even the smallest details, always looking for something to control. And when her eyes landed on Sarah's Jeep, parked behind a sturdy lock, her irritation turned into obsession. What came next was as shocking as it was reckless. Without warning, Karen marched across the driveway one evening, cutters in hand, and snapped the lock as if it meant nothing. In her mind, she was teaching Sarah a lesson, proving that no one could challenge her authority. But Karen had made a mistake so dangerous it would pull her into a world she never thought she'd face. Because that Jeep didn't just belong to Sarah. It was quietly tied to a special police task force, and the lock Karen had cut wasn't just for security, it was for protection. And in that single, reckless act, she had crossed a line that could change everything. Sarah had always been careful with that Jeep. To the neighbors, it looked like any other vehicle, maybe a bit older, maybe a bit tougher, but to Sarah, it carried weight. She had been asked, quietly and without much explanation, by someone she trusted in the local police to keep it safe for a while. The Jeep had history, and more importantly, it had connections to an ongoing investigation that few people knew about. That was why she had fitted the lock and chain, why she kept it close, and why she never left it unattended for too long. Karen, of course, never cared about reasons. She only saw what she wanted to see. To her, the lock on the Jeep was a challenge to her authority, a symbol that someone in her neighborhood was refusing to fall in line. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that the HOA rules gave her power to act. But deep down, it was pride and spite that drove her to cut through the lock. As Sarah returned home that evening, the first thing she noticed was the broken chain lying on the ground. Her stomach dropped. For a moment, she thought someone had tried to steal the Jeep. But then, as she looked around, she saw Karen standing by her own porch, arms folded, a smug smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. The silence between them was sharp, heavy with unspoken words. Sarah's heart raced. She knew the Jeep wasn't just hers to protect. It belonged to something bigger, something she couldn't fully explain. And now, with the lock broken, she had no idea what might unfold next. What Karen thought was a simple act of control might just bring the entire neighborhood into the middle of a storm. Sarah didn't sleep much that night. She kept replaying the image of the broken lock, the way Karen stood there as if daring her to say something. What unsettled her even more was the thought of the police. They had been clear, the Jeep had to stay secure, untouched, and unnoticed. Sarah wasn't given details, but she understood enough to know it wasn't just about property, it was about evidence. If Karen had poked around inside even for a moment, it could compromise everything. Across the street, Karen was busy spinning her own story. To her friends in the HOA, she framed it as taking action, protecting the image of the neighborhood. She complained about Sarah's Jeep being an eyesore, about the chain making the street look like a scrapyard. But beneath her speeches was something more personal. Karen had always resented how Sarah kept to herself, never bending to the constant rules and meetings. To Karen, this wasn't just about a vehicle, it was about control. Meanwhile, Sarah's closest friend, Emma, grew worried when she heard what happened. Emma had noticed unmarked cars passing through the area at odd hours, always slowing near Sarah's driveway. She didn't believe in coincidences, and now the lock incident made everything feel connected. She urged Sarah to come clean, to at least share what she knew before things spiraled further. But Sarah was torn. She had made a promise to keep quiet, and breaking that trust could put her in danger. Still, the pressure was growing. Neighbors were whispering, Karen was stirring the pot with every conversation, and the Jeep, once something Sarah barely thought twice about, now felt like a target under a spotlight. What no one realized yet was that the real consequences of that broken lock were only just beginning to unfold. The following days felt like walking on glass for Sarah. Every time she looked at the Jeep, she wondered if someone else had tampered with it, if another pair of eyes had already noticed what Karen had done. The police hadn't called yet, but that silence felt heavier than words. She knew it was only a matter of time before questions were asked, and she dreaded being the one caught in the middle. Karen, however, thrived in the growing tension. She paraded around the neighborhood, bragging about how she had handled the Jeep situation. Some neighbors cheered her boldness, others whispered that she had gone too far, but all of them were watching closely. For Karen, that attention was fuel. She didn't realize she was drawing eyes far beyond the block, eyes that were sharper, quieter, and much more dangerous. Late one evening, Sarah noticed a black SUV idling just down the road. Its headlights were off, but she could see the faint glow of someone inside. She froze, heart thudding, remembering Emma's warnings about unmarked cars. When the vehicle pulled away without a sound, she felt no relief, only dread. Something was closing in, and she could sense it. Then came the sound that shattered the fragile calm. A loud bang echoed from her driveway, followed by muffled voices. Sarah rushed to the window, breath caught in her throat. She saw shadows moving around the Jeep, flashlights cutting across the dark. For a moment she thought it was thieves, but the movements were too controlled, too deliberate. Sarah's pulse raced as she realized this wasn't random. Someone had come for the Jeep. And Karen, still awake across the street, had stepped out onto her porch, watching with that same smug expression, completely unaware of the storm about to crash down on all of them. Sarah's breath fogged the window as she pressed closer, straining to make sense of the figures surrounding the Jeep. Then one of the flashlights swept upward, catching a badge glinting in the dark. Her chest tightened. These weren't thieves, they were officers. But instead of bringing comfort, the sight made her blood run cold. If they were here in secret, it meant the situation was far more serious than she had been told. Karen, unable to resist stirring trouble, shouted across the street. "About time someone dealt with that eyesore!" Her voice cut through the night, shrill and mocking. The officers froze, their attention snapping to her porch. Sarah wanted to scream for Karen to be quiet, but it was too late. The silence that followed was even more unnerving, as though everyone was suddenly aware that something had gone terribly wrong. Then came the second shock. One of the officers popped the Jeep's rear compartment open and carefully lifted out a locked steel case. Sarah had never seen it before, and the realization hit her like a stone. It wasn't just a vehicle under protection. It was holding something important, something dangerous enough to draw an entire task force. Karen leaned forward with a smirk, clearly thinking her complaints had finally brought action. But Sarah noticed the way the officers exchanged quick, tense looks, as if the appearance of a nosy neighbor had just complicated everything. Sarah's pulse hammered. If Karen pushed any further, she might stumble into secrets that could put her in serious danger. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching long. Sarah gripped the edge of the curtain, torn between rushing outside or staying hidden. Because now it wasn't just about her Jeep anymore, it was about whatever was inside it, and the fact that the whole neighborhood had unknowingly been pulled into its shadow. The night seemed to hold its breath as the officers tightened their circle around the Jeep. Sarah finally pushed open her door, stepping into the cool air, her voice steady but low. "That Jeep is mine," she said, her eyes fixed on the steel case. One of the officers turned, recognition flashing across his face. "Ms. Bennett," he said firmly, "you've done your part. We'll take it from here." Karen, emboldened by the scene, stormed down her porch. "Oh, no, you won't. That thing has been sitting here breaking every rule we have. I cut the lock myself. This entire street deserves to know what's been hidden in there." Her words rang out sharp and reckless, echoing through the still neighborhood. The lead officer's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, step back. This is official business." But Karen kept advancing, her need for control outweighing her sense of caution. Sarah's stomach twisted. She knew one more word from Karen could unravel everything. Then the twist came. Before anyone could react, the case in the officer's hands gave a faint mechanical click. The sound was small but chilling, like a clock striking the wrong hour. All eyes darted to it. The officer froze, muttering into his radio. Karen stumbled back, her bravado fading at once. Sarah's heart pounded as realization dawned. The Jeep hadn't just been sheltering evidence. It had been housing a decoy, rigged to signal if tampered with. The officers moved quickly, securing the case and guiding both women back. "This street is no longer just yours," one of them told Sarah quietly. "It's now part of an operation." As lights from more vehicles flooded the road, Karen stood pale and silent for the first time. Sarah, though shaken, felt the weight lift, only to wonder what other secrets her Jeep had been carrying all along. The flashing lights painted the quiet English street in red and blue, breaking the silence that once defined it. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering about the sudden chaos outside Sarah's home. The officers secured the steel case in a larger vehicle, their movements precise and unhurried, as if they had rehearsed this moment many times before. Sarah stood at the edge of her driveway, her arms folded tight, trying to process the whirlwind that had turned her simple Jeep into the center of an operation. Karen, for once, had no words. Her usual sharpness had been replaced by pale shock, her earlier pride unraveling into regret. The reality of cutting that lock, of prying into something far bigger than neighborhood rules, had finally settled on her shoulders. She muttered something about just following HOA rules, but no one paid attention anymore. The power she clung to had vanished the moment the officers arrived. Sarah finally turned to her friend Emma, who had hurried over once the street filled with police. "I should have told you more," Sarah admitted softly. Emma shook her head. "You did what you had to, and now you know why they asked you to keep it safe." Before leaving, the lead officer approached Sarah with a nod of respect. "You did well. That Jeep served its purpose. It won't be returning here, but you've played a bigger role than you realize." His words carried a weight that both unsettled and comforted her. As the last vehicle pulled away, the neighborhood returned to stillness. Sarah breathed deeply, the air finally feeling lighter. The Jeep was gone, and with it, the burden she had carried. What remained was a lesson that some battles aren't about control or pride, but about trust, patience, and knowing when to stand firm.